The Taiwan Strait is 110 miles wide at its narrowest point. 110 miles of water between the mainland coast of the People's Republic of China, where the largest military buildup in the post-Cold War era has been underway for 2 decades, and the island of Taiwan, a democracy of 23 million people that the People's Republic officially considers a renegade province and has never renounced the use of force to reclaim. 110 miles. The English Channel, for comparison, is 21 miles at its narrowest. The Normandy landings crossed 21 miles of water against a defended coast and produced the bloodiest single day in the history of the Western Front. Military planners on both sides of the Taiwan Strait have been studying Normandy for decades. One side to understand how to replicate it, the other side to understand how to prevent it. The military standoff across those 110 miles is the most consequential and most closely watched potential conflict in the world today. It involves the second largest economy on Earth, the most powerful military alliance in history, the island that produces over 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors, and a body of water through which 40% of global container shipping passes every year. It also involves something that military planners find more difficult to quantify than missile counts or naval tonnage: the specific, complex, contested question of what both sides actually want, and whether what they want can be obtained without the 110-mile crossing that both sides have been preparing for, and that neither side, by any honest analysis, fully wants to make. This is the story of the military standoff. The weapons, the war plans, the doctrine, and the human beings on both sides who live inside the shadow of a war that has not started and may never start and must, for the stability of the world, never start, and that both sides are preparing for as though it will. Act 1: The PLA, the force that changed everything. In 1996, during the Third Taiwan Strait crisis, the United States sent 2 aircraft carrier battle groups to the waters near Taiwan in response to Chinese military exercises that included live missile tests bracketing the island. China, whose military at that time was a large but largely obsolete force, built for Cold War-era mass warfare rather than the precision, networked combat of the late 20th century, backed down. The crisis passed. Taiwan held its elections. The People's Liberation Army did not forget. The humiliation of 1996 produced, in the Chinese Communist Party's strategic planning apparatus, a determination that became the organizing principle of the largest peacetime military transformation in modern history. China would build a military that no American carrier group could casually deploy against. It would build a military capable of executing the one operation that the party considered, above all others, strategically necessary: the successful forcible reunification of Taiwan, if diplomacy failed to achieve it by other means. 20 years later, the transformation is largely complete. The People's Liberation Army Navy is now the largest navy in the world by number of hulls, surpassing the United States Navy in that metric in 2020, and continuing to grow. China has commissioned aircraft carriers, 2 conventional and 1 nuclear capable, with more under construction. It has built a fleet of modern destroyers, frigates, and amphibious assault ships that has no precedent in Chinese naval history. The PLA rocket force, the branch responsible for China's ballistic and cruise missile arsenal, has developed what Western analysts call the world's most sophisticated anti-access/area denial capability, a layered system of missiles designed to prevent American naval forces from operating freely in the Western Pacific. The DF-21D and DF-26 ballistic missiles, the carrier killers, in the shorthand of defense analysis, are designed to hit moving ships at sea from land-based launchers deep inside China, at ranges that keep the launchers beyond the reach of carrier-based aircraft. The DF-41 intercontinental ballistic missile, road-mobile and therefore difficult to locate and destroy in a first strike, carries multiple independently targetable warheads. The hypersonic glide vehicles that China has tested, and that Western intelligence assessed with considerable alarm, maneuver at speeds that existing missile defense systems cannot reliably intercept. The PLA Air Force has transitioned from a force built around Soviet-era aircraft to one equipped with fifth-generation fighters, the J-20 Chengdu, China's answer to the F-22 Raptor, and a growing fleet of advanced fourth-generation platforms. Its long-range strike capability has expanded to include bombers that can reach Taiwan and return without refueling. The question that Pentagon analysts ask, in the classified assessments that frame American strategic planning, is not whether the PLA has become formidable. It clearly has. The question is whether it has become formidable enough, whether the specific, extraordinarily complex military operation of a forced crossing of the Taiwan Strait, an opposed amphibious landing on a defended island, could be executed successfully against a determined defender with American support. The answer, by most serious assessments, is not yet. But the window is closing. Act 2. Taiwan's defense, the Porcupine Doctrine. Taiwan cannot match China symmetrically. The arithmetic is too lopsided, a 23 million person island democracy against a 1.4 billion person continental power with the second largest defense budget in the world. Any attempt to build a military capable of defeating a Chinese invasion in a conventional force-on-force engagement would bankrupt the island and still fall short. Taiwan's defense planners have, in recent years, arrived at a different doctrine, one that accepts the asymmetry and designs around it rather than against it. The concept is sometimes called the Porcupine Strategy, not to defeat the PLA, but to make the cost of invasion prohibitive. To be so difficult to digest, so thoroughly covered in defensive spines, that the predator decides the meal is not worth the injury. The weapons that implement this doctrine are deliberately unglamorous. Not aircraft carriers or advanced fighters, though Taiwan operates a fleet of F-16s that have been upgraded to near Block 70 standard and constitute a genuine air capability. The Porcupine Doctrine is built around missiles, mines, and mobile systems that can survive the initial bombardment that any Chinese invasion would begin with and continue to impose costs on the crossing force during and after the beach landing. The Harpoon anti-ship missile, Taiwan has purchased 400 of them from the United States, is designed to be fired from mobile land-based launchers against the amphibious fleet attempting the crossing. 400 harpoons, dispersed across the island in mobile units that are difficult to locate and destroy before they fire, represent a serious threat to any surface fleet attempting to put troops ashore. The HIMARS multiple launch rocket system, also purchased from the United States, in a sale that Beijing protested with the specific intensity it reserves for American arms transactions with Taiwan, provides precision ground attack capability from mobile platforms. Adams missiles, which HIMARS can fire, have a range sufficient to reach targets on the Chinese mainland from Taiwan, a capability with obvious deterrent implications. Undersea mines are perhaps the most cost-effective component of Taiwan's asymmetric defense. A mining campaign in the Taiwan Strait, seeded from submarines, from aircraft, from surface vessels in the opening hours of a conflict, would impose extraordinary delays on any crossing attempt, forcing Chinese minesweepers to clear lanes before the amphibious fleet could move, consuming time and exposing the fleet to air and missile attack during the clearing operation. Taiwan's submarine force is small, currently 4 boats, 2 of which are 1970s-era American vessels of limited capability. But this is changing. Taiwan's indigenous defense submarine program is producing new boats, domestically designed with foreign assistance, that will add genuine undersea capability to the island's defenses in the coming years. The critical vulnerability in Taiwan's Porcupine Doctrine is the opening bombardment. Any Chinese invasion would begin with an intensive campaign of missile and air strikes designed to destroy Taiwan's air defenses, its command and control infrastructure, its ports and airfields, and as much of its mobile missile capability as Chinese intelligence could locate. Taiwan's ability to absorb this opening blow, to retain enough of its defensive capability after the first 48 to 72 hours to make the crossing costly, is the central question of its defense planning. The answer depends, in large part, on hardening, dispersion, and deception, building facilities that can survive strikes, distributing systems widely enough that no single attack can disable the whole, and concealing positions thoroughly enough that Chinese targeting is incomplete. It depends, also, on speed, on Taiwan's ability to mobilize its reserves and transition to wartime operations faster than Chinese planners assume. Act 3. The American Variable, Strategic Ambiguity. The United States has, since 1979, maintained a policy toward Taiwan that is one of the most carefully constructed legal fictions in the history of diplomacy. It officially recognizes the People's Republic of China as the sole legitimate government of China. It does not officially recognize Taiwan as an independent state. It simultaneously sells Taiwan the weapons it needs to defend itself and has passed, through the Taiwan Relations Act, a commitment to provide Taiwan with defensive arms and to maintain the American capacity to resist any resort to force that would jeopardize Taiwan's security. This is called strategic ambiguity. It is ambiguous by design, the deliberate maintenance of uncertainty about exactly what the United States would do if China attacked Taiwan. The theory is that ambiguity deters both Chinese aggression and Taiwanese independence declarations. China cannot be certain that an invasion would not trigger American military intervention, and Taiwan cannot be certain that a unilateral declaration of independence would receive American support. The ambiguity has been tested by time and by the changing military balance. In the 1990s, when American military superiority over China was overwhelming, the ambiguity was comfortable. Everyone understood that the United States could intervene decisively if it chose to. As the PLA has modernized and as China's anti-access/area denial capabilities have made American intervention more costly, the ambiguity has become less comfortable. The question of whether it still deters, or whether it has become a source of miscalculation risk, is one of the most actively debated questions in American strategic studies. Recent American statements have complicated the ambiguity further. President Biden, on multiple occasions, stated directly that the United States would defend Taiwan militarily if China attacked, statements that the White House subsequently walked back, insisting that policy had not changed. The pattern of statement and retraction is itself a form of signal, one that different audiences in Beijing and Taipei may be reading differently. The military logistics of American intervention in a Taiwan conflict are complex and contested. The nearest major American base to Taiwan is in Okinawa, Japan, approximately 400 miles away. Guam is 1,600 miles away. The carrier groups and the air power that would constitute the primary American intervention capability would need days to reach the theater from their peacetime positions, during which time the Chinese crossing could be consolidating on the island. The American strategy for Taiwan defense has therefore shifted emphasis in recent years toward enabling Taiwan to defend itself in the critical early phase, the first days of a conflict, before American forces could arrive in strength. This is the logic behind the arms sales, behind the military training programs, behind the informal American military presence on the island that has grown significantly in recent years. The bet is that if Taiwan can hold long enough, the full weight of American and Allied military power can be brought to bear. Act 4. The war scenario: what the crossing would look like. Military planners do not like discussing specific war scenarios publicly, for the obvious reason that the discussion itself becomes part of the adversary's planning. But the broad outlines of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan have been examined in enough war games, academic analyses, and congressional testimonies to construct a credible general picture. Phase 1 would be fires, an intensive, sustained campaign of ballistic and cruise missile strikes against Taiwan's military infrastructure, air defense systems, command nodes, and crucially its will to resist. Hundreds of missiles, possibly thousands, in the opening hours. The objective would be to blind Taiwan's defenses and to create the conditions for the crossing before Taiwan's reserves could be mobilized and before American forces could arrive. Phase 2 would be the crossing itself, the most dangerous and most logistically complex military operation imaginable. The PLA's amphibious lift capacity has grown substantially but remains, by most assessments, insufficient to transport the force needed for a successful assault landing in a single wave. China would need to supplement its military amphibious ships with requisitioned civilian roll-on/roll-off ferries, vessels that are not designed for opposed landings and that would be vulnerable to anti-ship missiles, submarines, and mines during the crossing. The beaches of western Taiwan present their own challenges. The island's coastline is largely dominated by mudflats, seawalls, and urban development that limits the number of viable landing beaches to a handful of locations. locations that Taiwan's defenders have had 75 years to prepare. The gradients are shallow, the tidal variations significant, and the beach exits channelized in ways that would concentrate the landing force and expose it to prepared defensive fires. Phase 3, the land battle, would be fought in an urban environment of considerable complexity. Taiwan's cities are dense, its road network built for civilian traffic rather than military logistics, its population potentially hostile to the occupying force. Urban warfare is the great equalizer of military conflict. It neutralizes the advantages of air power and advanced technology, rewards the defender's knowledge of the terrain, and imposes costs on the attacker that no amount of preparation fully anticipates. The war games conducted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies in 2023, among the most detailed unclassified analyses of the scenario, found that in most scenarios, China fails to take Taiwan but at enormous cost to all parties. Taiwan suffers severe damage to its economy and infrastructure. The United States loses ships and aircraft in numbers not seen since the Second World War. China's military and economic losses are catastrophic. The global economy, disrupted by the loss of Taiwanese semiconductor production and the closure of the Taiwan Strait to shipping, enters a severe recession. There are no good outcomes in these scenarios. There is only a spectrum of catastrophe, a range of bad results whose relative positions on the scale depend on decisions made in the opening hours of a conflict that neither side's planning can fully anticipate. This is the deterrent logic at the heart of the standoff. The crossing is possible. It is not reliably winnable. And the cost of attempting it and failing, militarily, economically, politically, may be existential for the Chinese Communist Party in a way that success could not compensate for. Act 5. The Semiconductor Dimension. Why the whole world has a stake. Taiwan produces over 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. The chips fabricated at Taiwan's Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, are inside every advanced weapons system, every smartphone, every data center, every piece of infrastructure that the modern global economy depends on. There is no near-term substitute for TSMC's production capacity. No factory anywhere in the world can replicate what TSMC does at the scale and technical level that the global economy requires. This fact has inserted the Taiwan conflict into the strategic calculus of every major economy on Earth, including many that have no particular interest in the geopolitical dimensions of the China-Taiwan dispute. For China, the semiconductor dimension cuts in both directions. Capturing Taiwan's chip-making capacity intact would represent an extraordinary strategic prize, the ability to control the supply of the most critical technology input in the modern global economy. But the probability of capturing it intact is low. TSMC has indicated, and American officials have confirmed, that the fabrication facilities would be rendered inoperable rather than allowed to fall into Chinese hands. A scorched fab scenario that would remove the prize even as it removed the island's defenses. For the United States and its allies, Taiwan's semiconductor production is simultaneously a strategic interest worth defending and a vulnerability worth hardening against. The CHIPS Act, the American legislation that has funded the construction of domestic semiconductor fabrication capacity, is, in part, a Taiwan contingency measure, an attempt to reduce American dependence on Taiwanese production before the contingency the dependence creates becomes acute. For the global economy, the closure of the Taiwan Strait to shipping would, by itself, impose costs estimated in the trillions of dollars. The actual destruction of TSMC's fabrication capacity, whether by Chinese bombardment, Taiwanese demolition, or the grinding attrition of a sustained conflict, would produce a technology recession of a depth and duration that no economist has fully modeled because the scenario is too disrupting to model comfortably. The semiconductor dimension means that the Taiwan conflict is not, in the final analysis, a regional dispute between China and a small island. It is a conflict with direct implications for every economy connected to the global supply chain, which is to say, every economy on Earth. Epilogue: 110 miles and everything that crosses them. The Taiwan Strait is 110 miles wide at its narrowest point. It has been, for 75 years, one of the most heavily militarized stretches of water on the planet, watched by satellites and submarines and the intelligence analysts of a dozen nations, sailed by warships conducting freedom of navigation operations, flown over by reconnaissance aircraft measuring signals and counting weapons and trying to read the intentions of governments that do not always make their intentions readable. The people who live on both sides of those 110 miles have built lives inside the shadow of a conflict that has not started and may never start. In Taiwan, the shadow is managed, acknowledged in civil defense drills and military service requirements, and the quiet, matter-of-fact way that Taiwanese discuss a threat that their generation has lived with so long that the threat has become part of the texture of ordinary life. In mainland China, the shadow is framed differently, as a matter of national dignity, of historical completeness, of the unfinished business of a civil war that ended everywhere except in the strait. The military balance is changing. The window in which Taiwan and its American patron can be confident of deterring a Chinese invasion is not closing. It has partially closed, and the trajectory of further closure is a matter of years, not decades. The decisions made in the next 5 to 10 years, about Taiwan's defense investment, about American force posture in the Pacific, about the diplomatic architecture that has kept the peace since 1979, will determine whether the 110 miles remain a deterred frontier or become a contested crossing. The weapons are real. The plans are real. The semiconductor fabrication plants are real. The 23 million people living on the island under the shadow of a military force that has spent 28 years preparing to cross 110 miles of water to reach them, they are real. The crossing has not happened. The question that the next generation will answer is whether the deterrent holds, whether the cost of the crossing continues to exceed the benefit in the calculation of the men in Beijing who must ultimately make the decision. 110 miles of water. Everything that matters is on both sides of it. The world is watching which way it flows.